Creating a professional trend publication, developing your digital image collective into physical trend boards. So in previous lessons we've been doing lots of research and gained lots of information, so let's take a look at what we've got so far. We've started off by doing a pastel analysis, making us aware of what's happening in society and seeing how this might develop over time, and taking this information to make useful predictions into scenarios that may help us develop these into trends. We've got lots of consumer information, we understand the consumer profiles we're going to try and target with our trends. We've done lots of competitor analysis, seeing what's currently out there to make sure that we offer newness with our current trends, and keeping one step ahead of what our competitors are doing. We also should now have a digital image collective with a wide selection of imagery to build up a trend story. So let's take a look at the chart that we've looked at a few times that maps the process of trend forecasting. So far we've gained all our research doing our fashion scan, our consumer scan, looking at cultural indicators and monitoring our partners and competitors. And we've taken all this information and able to make a fashion analysis as well as a trend analysis, and obviously our competitor analysis should be doing the whole time anyway. So combining both of these, we should then be able to develop all this information into trend stories. So before we start looking into how to develop our trend boards, let's briefly recap over the role of a forecaster. A trend forecaster or trend service offers brands and retailers trend insights into the future, typically up to 18 months to 2 years in advance. They decipher what is happening in the market and how this will influence and determine trends, give clear seasonal direction to a specific market or client, provide information on how consumers are changing and developing, as well as offering insights into style, colour palette, key shapes, prints and graphics, fabrics, embellishments, and consumer behaviour. So there are two main types of trend forecasting. The first one being when you're trend forecasting for a specific client. So for example, a brand or retailer might brief you to come up with some seasonal direction for trends specifically for them, which would be exclusive to them at the same time. And then there's trend forecasting for a wider market, where you'd be producing a trend publication which could be sold to anybody that's targeted at a specific market sector. There are various different publications and services that are available that target various different market sectors. But however, it's still a very competitive market. So the first type of trend forecasting is client forecasting, when you're trend forecasting for a specific brand or client. So when you're doing this type of forecasting, you need to ask yourself, who is the brand and who is their target market? What will be important to that customer that season? What has the brand been doing? Of course you need to offer newness. There's no point creating a trend for them which they've already done the past season, it won't sell. What is their handwriting and brand ethos? There's also no point in creating trends that wouldn't suit the brand. The outcome is you'd either be doing a trend presentation where you'd be presenting them physically, maybe in a presentation form, a PowerPoint to them, and alongside a trend pack to a physical document. Of course, all this information would be exclusive to that brand or client. The second type of trend forecasting is forecasting for a wider market, trend forecasting for a broad specific market sector, for example, children's wear. In this scenario, you need to ask yourself, how can I be general without being vague? What are the key trends this season that will target your market? What has been on trend previously? Again, you need to offer newness. You can't offer a trend that's already been in stores perhaps, or that other trend publications have done for a previous season. And also colour palettes will need to be fresh, so you need to be considerate of this at the same time. Who are your target consumers, your consumer profiles that you want to target with these trends? Make sure that the trends are appropriate and will sell to these consumers. The outcome would be a physical trend publication that brands could purchase within that market sector, and or a digital trends on websites. Okay, so hopefully at this stage you've done lots of research and started to create broad digital image collectives for each one of your trend stories. Remember, you need a really broad image collective in order to create a successful and cohesive trend board. If you don't have enough images, you'll soon find it really difficult to create your trend boards because you won't have enough images to narrow down. Once you have all your images, you can then start deciding which ones work best together, which ones fit together to tell the idea of your trend story. This may take some time, but you'll get there in the end. Remember, choose your images wisely. Ask yourself of each image, is this image telling the story of my trend? So what should a trend publication look like and include? First of all, what should a trend publication do? A trend publication should give seasonal direction on style, colour palettes, key shapes, prints and graphics, fabrics, embellishments, and consumer behaviour and so on to the market sector it's targeting, and more importantly, the brand designers that's purchasing it. It should kickstart, expand, and confirm a brand and retailer's own trend research. So how should your forecasting publication be formatted? Your trend forecasting publication should follow a certain format. Remember, this is a professional document that people pay lots of money for, quite often in excess of £1,000 each. So you should begin with a professional and considered cover page. A numbered contents page should follow. Then you should have an introduction to the whole forecasting publication as a whole, before your trend stories. So then each one should be displayed with its own trend cover page, a small brief introduction to the whole trend, followed by the trend boards and any fabric-focused print and graphics pages that follow that. After that, you can add your consumer profiles. You've obviously spent a lot of time developing these, so it's really nice to include that in the pack as well. And then finally, a bibliography and image referencing, quoting any secondary sources that you've quoted throughout, and as well as all your images. These must be referenced as well. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of a trend publication that does this. Here's one of my trend publications for autumn-winter 2018-19. You can see I start with credits for people that have contributed, a contents page with all the trends, an introduction to the trends including introduction to the pastel. I also include a colour matrix. Then there's title pages, fabric pages. Then we go on to have all the trends, which I split up into age categories. So you've got older, younger, baby and layette, into both girls and boys wear. And then at the back of each trend I have a print and graphics page. Again, starting the trends with a title page, a fabric page, and again each of the trends split up into boys and girls and into the two age categories. You can see there's a consistency here. All the colour palettes and titles are within the same place. The same fonts are used throughout. I don't suddenly change the font. The title pages all look the same. And although there's different information throughout, I've used the same method of presentation throughout. This keeps it really, really consistent. And this is really important within a trend publication. You don't want to suddenly introduce different fonts, make it look halfway through like it's a completely different publication. You want to keep it looking really, really professional throughout. So selecting fonts and methods of display are really, really important. And you can take inspiration from page layouts. You don't just have to reinvent the wheel each time. Look on the internet, look at magazines, look at blogs. Find different and interesting ways to illustrate and present your pages. And remember, you can use white space. Don't worry about leaving bits of white space. This helps people to navigate through the pages. There's no need to completely fill the pages or make them look cluttered or present too much information. So again, I end the document with credits to any designers, and again there's a professional rear cover as well. So let's look at each part in more detail. So the cover page, this should be simple and on brand. So again, keeping it representative of the target market that you're aiming your trend publication at. Again, remember this is a professional document and people pay lots of money for this kind of thing. And remember, this is the first thing that people will see. It should include ideally your title, the season that you're targeting the trend publication at, perhaps the sector that you're targeting them at, for example kidswear, and as well as your own name, the author and the creator. You should create the introduction, the cover pages last of all, once you've collated the whole trend publication, and you might want to keep a key image saved for the front. Then your contents page. It's great to have a contents page, especially in larger documents. You can list all the trends and all the different things that are within the publication and make sure they correspond with page numbers within the document. Again, you do this last of all, even though it's at the front of the book. Then give an introduction. Outline what your publication contains. Who is it aimed at? How have you come up with all these trends consumer profiles? Refer to all that lovely pastel and consumer profile information and research that you've conducted. What key things are the most important? Introduce your trends at the same time. Again, this doesn't have to be as long as what I've presented here. Literally just a few lines or a couple of paragraphs is absolutely fine for a smaller publication or something that's just targeted at a specific brand. You can then move on to your trend stories. Include a title page for each of these trend stories like I just showed you in the flick through of my publication. Any introductions necessary, followed by each of the trend boards and a fabric print and graphics board. Then your consumer profiles. It's really, really nice to include your consumer profiles. You've done a lot of work on them. There's lots of information that you've gathered that is really, really crucial for your target market or the brand and retailer that you're working for. And then you can just follow this in the same format as your trends. So include a title page, any introduction necessary, followed by the consumer profile boards. Then at the very back, you want to have a bibliography and image referencing. Then finally, you have a back cover. This should be simple, but again on brand. Again, people pay a lot of money for these documents, so don't just leave it blank. Put on an image or a brief introduction about what the trend publication is about. This can just be a plain or with a brief summary. So how do you create a trend board? Trend stories. How do you select and lay out the trend boards? Select and refine your images carefully. Think about your trend story and concept. What is the information that you're trying to get across? Are all of the images saying what you want them to say, and are they specific to the trend concept? Is there a synergy forming between your images? Is there a colour palette forming? If the answer to any of these is no, replace the image and find something more suitable from your digital image collective. And if you're struggling, then you probably need to do more research and make your image collective a lot broader. Remember, white space is your friend. Don't overcrowd a page. 5 to 10 images on a trend board is more than enough. Sometimes less is more, definitely in this scenario. Select your fonts wisely. Make sure they're appropriate and on brand. Make sure they're legible and keep them consistent throughout. Don't keep chopping and changing them. Be consistent. Use the same fonts and layout style throughout, similar to the presentation that I showed you. Make sure it looks professional and presentable. Edit, check and check again. Spell and grammar check all your work. Make sure there are absolutely no mistakes. So what information should you include on each trend board? The first thing you want to include is the name of your trend. For example, in this instance, it's farmers market. The next thing is the position in the season that this trend is aimed at. So we have spring, summer trends and autumn, winter trends. But each of those seasons we also split up. First of all, it begins with a transitional trend, then autumn, then winter, or spring, then summer. Then you want to just give a very brief outline of a trend, including some buzzwords or some keywords for the trend. Then obviously all your key images for the trend that build up the picture and overview of the trend visually. Then you can aim at a specific sector. For example, this one is aimed at older girls. It might be luxury women's wear. It might be casual menswear, for example. It's always nice to include this as well. And then, of course, your colour palette, something we'll look at a later stage in more detail. This diagram gives a good overview of the amount of images, the type of images that there should be, as well as all the titles that you should include. Remember, white space is your friend. Use it. Don't try and overcrowd any of your trend boards. Image selection. Above all, your images need to have a strong synergy between them. Synergy. What do we mean by this? The interaction of elements that, when combined, produce a total effect that is greater than the sum of an individual element and contributions. So, for example, if you've got a trend, for example, like my farmers market one, just one of those images on their own wouldn't make any sense. But as you start to compile them together, they start to describe that story. That's what you need to be doing with your trend boards. In an image like this, it's very clear to see which one stands out as the odd one out. But let's have a look at some other trends and other images and see if we can spot the odd one out in each. The one that breaks the synergy. Here are 3 separate images. In each individual image, it's clear to see which element breaks the synergy. Obviously the yellow face, the blue duck, and the pencil that's not blunt. But let's take another look at another board. In all these images, which one sticks out as the one that breaks the synergy? This one's quite simple. It's obvious it's the green one. And once it's replaced, you can see that everything works a lot nicer. There's a great flow and the colour palette remains the same. And again, there's a clear synergy between all the images. Let's take a look at another. So here we have some images that are forming a trend board. Again, which one do you think doesn't work? Yes, it's the converse. Again, there's a couple of things that don't work here. One thing, in comparison to the rest of the women's wear that's quite smart and directional, the Converse just doesn't fit in terms of style. And of course, obviously, the colour palette doesn't fit in. This is obviously just a very black and white trend, and the blue wash denim of the Converse really doesn't sit in. But replacing it with the grey denim, you can see, again, it's just a lot more easier on the eye and there's a good synergy forming. So these are the sort of things that you want to start looking at and thinking about when you're creating your trend boards. What images are working together? What images aren't working together? Have you got too many? Not enough? What's the odd one out? Until you get a good synergy forming and it works. This isn't easy and it does take time. Here's another board, a denim focus for men. So there's a lot more images on here. Which ones do you think are the odd one out? So I think those two are the main ones that don't work here. But there's also a couple of other elements that do work here that perhaps aren't working as good as they could be. So let's take a look at how we can retransform this board. So these are the key images that work best together. But you can see by changing the colour of the denims there, lightening up the denim of the dungarees, and cropping the graffiti image, these start to work a lot better together. So you might have the ideal image, but it might just be not quite the right tone. So you might want to take it into something like Photoshop, lighten it up, or transform the colours to make it work a bit better. This is absolutely fine. So here's another trend board. What images or image do you think is the odd one out here? Yes, that bottom one with the little boy. You can see that was very black and white, and it gave like a rock and roll kind of lifestyle shot, whereas obviously this is very much a very soft and feminine range. And you can see that works a lot better now. And again, another one. So looking at this board, this one maybe is a bit more tricky. What on the whole of this board is not working? Can you spot it? Okay, so it's the colour palette. As you can see, the blue that was in there wasn't working and didn't connect to the colour palette, and there's an obvious green that's forming on lots of the prints. Okay, so let's take another example. Let's take a look at the following trend board. What is it that's not working or wrong on the following trend board? There's a number of things. Okay, so there's a number of images on this trend board. There's a few things that are wrong with it. Personally, as a designer, I instantly can't see what I'm taking focus on, what I'm trying to digest here. I wouldn't know how to design a collection from this. So what ones definitely aren't working? There's way too many catwalk images for a start, so we've got rid of those. And as you can see, they all had such dark backgrounds, it was difficult to translate into what you're trying to illustrate to the designer. So as you replace those with more conceptual images like we've discussed before, it becomes a lot more easier on the eye. And again, there's bits here that are illustrating the different types of fabric, different types of print, key shapes. There's lots for me to take from here. I could definitely design a collection from this. What's the next thing that's not working? It'd have to be the fonts. The fonts are kind of childish looking, very sort of hand-drawn. They just don't illustrate the geometric feel to this trend. Once you replace them with a more professional looking font, again, it's a lot more clearer and gives it an overall lot more professional look. Okay, so we've seen lots of information, and now here's the task. So start shifting through your digital image collective. Find what images work best together for each story. Remember, 5 to 10 images you should aim for, and 5 to 7 is absolutely fine. You don't have to aim for 10. Remember, white space is your friend, and quite often less is more. Start laying them out together, refitting them, changing the position of them, play around with them. Make sure there is a synergy forming or starting to form. Make sure each image represents the theme of your trend story. Ask each one, are you working? Are you saying what I want you to say? Select a font that represents your trend target market. Do this for each one of your trend stories. Add a title, an introduction, the season and the target market, and see how you get on. Good luck.